Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a Cremona, benvenuti in questo dipartimento, benvenuti a questo convegno. Siamo molto lieti che il Dipartimento possa ospitare una conferenza di questo livello. Siete a Cremona magari non nel periodo migliore della sua stagione, però nonostante tutto Cremona funziona sempre per questi eventi. Welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to welcome everyone here in the city of Cremona. Maybe not at best of his weather, but it's winter also in Italy. There is a winter also in Italy, not a Norwegian one maybe, but there is a winter. And then welcome to this department. It has a long tradition in early music, so it is a very pleasure for us to welcome and guest such a prestigious conference. And penso che sia importante tornare su questi argomenti non solo scientificamente, ma anche in un momento nel quale il nostro processo di integrazione europea non sembra precisamente al suo massimo splendore, e quindi tornare alle radici di ciò che siamo stati è sempre un momento di scoperta di noi stessi, e sappiamo molto bene che se vogliamo ritrovare una unità non la possiamo trovare nelle vicende politiche o nelle vicende statali che ci portano piuttosto alla divisione nella storia, ma lo troviamo nella cultura. E quindi questa è una ragione in più per essere molto contenti di parlare di queste cose che ci uniscono nel tempo, nello spazio, ma sono anche molto contemporanee a noi. Grazie di tutto e do la parola a Giovanni.
Ok, grazie. Ringraziamo il professor Sabaino, direttore del Dipartimento. Quasi quasi mi siedo se non ho un problema. Dirò proprio due parole e dirò due parole fra le quali c'è il ringraziamento appunto per l'appoggio da parte del Dipartimento a questo progetto Scribemus, che ormai ha raggiunto appunto i 2 anni e mezzo di vita e ha trovato nel Dipartimento di Musicologia e Beni Culturali davvero una sede ottimale per crescere e svilupparsi. Il Dipartimento è davvero una macchina dove tutti lavorano molto e con grande impegno, anche dal punto di vista davvero amministrativo, e poi ovviamente è un centro d'eccellenza per lo studio di queste discipline, direi quasi a livello proprio mondiale, ecco, perché non so se ci sono altre università al mondo che hanno un corso di teoria e storia della notazione della monodia del Medioevo, quindi insomma è una cosa davvero eccezionale, quindi grazie ancora. So che il direttore è impegnato, per cui non potrà essere presente a tutte le sessioni, però ha detto che cercherà di partecipare quanto possibile. La conferenza di oggi, appunto, è Alternative Roots, the Spreading of Liturgical Chant in Post-Carolingian Europe, è una conferenza internazionale e, come del resto è il progetto Scribemus, quindi si svolgerà completamente in lingua inglese, con possibilità ovviamente di fare domande in italiano che verranno poi tradotte. So good morning and welcome. Welcome to the Department of Musicology and Cultural Heritage at the University of Pavia, and thank you very much for braving the weather and the risk of travel disruptions to be here with us today and over the course of these 2 days. We are here to celebrate the beginning of the second half of the project. Present here is the whole team, quite the whole team, in fact the whole team, yes, to whom I really wish to express my sincere gratitude for their support in the organization of this meeting. The team is slightly smaller than when the call for papers was originally sent out last summer, but Edina, who's no longer working for the project, will still come to the conference, travel and trains permitting. we started 2.5 years ago with the idea of trying to avoid at all costs reinventing the wheel, but equally to be very cautious with claims of shifting paradigms or rewriting histories. And I think we're sort of managing to do that. And what we are doing, and I am actually going to use another set of abused phrases, is trying to really break new ground. And we like to think that we are kind of opening new paths and new directions, shedding light on previously lesser known areas and or connections, all directed to understanding the spreading of pneumatic notation in even more depth, from the appearance of more local varieties to larger families, to the moment of maximum diffusion around the year 1000, and then to the gradual retirement, so to speak, 1 century later. And as you will have seen, each session includes at least one paper by a team member, and it is often chaired by another. Some of our papers are works in progress. I'm thinking of Francesco and Sarah, but actually most are presentations of concluded phases of larger trajectories. So I wouldn't quite call them works in progress, but still are, let's say, first milestones in a larger path. So we are approaching, as I said, the next 2.5 years with a solid sense of direction, but with our ears and minds wide open, not only to other disciplines, as I'm sure will come across quite clearly in these 2 days, but also to the whole community, to the whole scholarly community. And we like to think of our project as a core group relying on and in constant conversation with colleagues and experts of other disciplines, as I said. And I will speak more in detail about the next phases of the project at the end of the conference tomorrow. But for now, on behalf of the whole team, I thank you very much indeed for coming to Cremona, as we said, in this freezing and humid Po Valley January, and I wish everybody a really enjoyable conference. Thank you very much. We can now start the first session. There's going to be a slight change in the schedule. Namely, the first presenter will be Patrick Marshner, and Catherine Bradley will be chairing the session.
So thank you very much, Daniele and Giovanni, for this warm welcome in cold Cremona, and we're all delighted to be here in such beautiful surroundings. And I'm ashamed to say I'm going to read Patrick's bio because I was not prepared for him to be presented. It's a great delight to be chairing. So Patrick studied at the Iberian chronicles and annals, their textual relations, and their manuscript transmission. And he's interested in historical geography and cosmology, as well as the history of thought, especially.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. And speaking of work in progress, this might also be a bit of work in progress, and I will explain why. If the slides go on, I will explain. Yes. I will talk to you first about a text, a computistic poem, a mnemonic poem called Anni Domini Nutantur, which very likely was written in or around Verona at the early 9th century. The oldest known copy that we have is today preserved in Florence, under the shelf mark that you can read on the screen here. And there is plenty of work done on this poem. The latest edition of it was published in 2021 by Chiara Savini and Irene Volpi. And this is a tremendous work. If this edition would not be there, I probably would have not anything to deliver for Scribemus. So I'm very happy about this book. It was a great help. And they used almost 30 manuscripts containing this poem. However, there are 5 further witnesses which they did not use for their book, mainly because they are in very unknown and very under-investigated manuscripts. And I was lucky enough to find these, at least 4 of these 5 witnesses. The very one that you can see on the screen here has already been worked on by Alfred Cordoliani and also Faith Wallace. And 2 of these 5 further witnesses that we have are directly related to each other and present or represent a version of the text that is merging different families of dissemination of this poem. And this is basically what I did during my first year in Scribemus. So what is abbreviated here with MD is the manuscript that you just saw. And I compared it with another manuscript which dates to the 11th century and was produced in Ripoll in today's Catalonia. And I could show that these 2 are directly related to each other. The let's call it Catalan version is a direct copy from the version from Avignon, which again has a strong influence of the, let's call it, Italian family of the text. And I was working in the previous year on this version, its templates, and also the entanglement with other known versions, showing that what Savini and Volpi call the Frankish family of the text has also had influence on a scriptorium in or around Carcassonne, which again left his marks or its traces in the 2 manuscripts that I was working on. There's a forthcoming article in Musica on this topic, on these new findings and their relation and these entanglements, these interrelations and connections. And yeah, this is where I am standing, and now I am searching for where to go from here, and this is what I'm going to present to you now. Anni Domini Nutantur has also been copied in 2 of the most famous liturgical and strongly notated manuscripts from the 11th century. So from the Cathedral Archive in Lyon, manuscript 8, it's very well known. The quires containing Anni Domini Nutantur date to 1069. And it is also contained in Rome Bibliotheca Angelica 123 from 11th century Bologna. So we have here 2 cases where this manuscript, this computistic manuscript, is contained in very important liturgical manuscripts. And we even have a 12th century case where there is notation on this poem, both letter notation and neumes. This was written somewhere in northeastern France. The location is not quite clear, and also I was not able to solve it, but we know that this computistic poem has been sung. And I tried to divide the witnesses of Anni Domini Nutantur into categories. These are my categories, so I try to read Anni Domini Nutantur that way. These are not contemporary categories. So the one is, it appears in liturgical books. It appears notated, so the text itself is notated, and this seems to be a very odd category. It appears in codices that have notations somewhere else in the codex, not necessarily related to Anni Domini Nutantur. So at the westernmost and the easternmost points of dissemination of this poem, we have these liturgical manuscripts that I was mentioning before, which are full of notation and which also contain Anni Domini Notantur. We have the one version where it appears, in which it appears with notation, and we have at least 4 times, 5 times even, witnesses of this poem where there is notation somewhere else in the codex, either contemporary or even a little bit younger. And the question is how to deal with this. The thing is, although this orange highlighted witnesses seem to be the least important for musicology, they were my gate opener to find many new fragments of notation, which were, at least compared to youngest or younger literature and also to the big databases that deal with neumes, not known to these. And I will get into that further as well. So based on the work on Anni Domini Notantur, a computistic mnemonic poem, there are comparable texts that I thought might be good steps to go on from where I am now. And one of these texts has the incipit Annus solis continetur quattuor temporibus. It's again a rhythmic poem, also on computus. A late version of it is dated to the year 1040. The latest edition we have is from 2006 by Arno Borst, and there is an edition of it in preparation by Irene Volpi, and there's already the, let's call it pre-edition, is online in the Corpus Rhythmorum Musicum. The thing with Annus solis continetur is that it very often appears in the same codices as Anni Domini Notantur, and sometimes even directly after it. So here we have a codex from 11th century near Lyon, and this is the final stanza of Anni Domini Notantur, and directly after we have Annus solis continetur. So these texts, these kind of texts, are collected, or have been collected in several manuscripts. It's very often that Annus solis continetur survived alongside Anni Domini Notantur, also directly after it. And as I mentioned before, there are quite a lot of computistic codices that contain notation. And also the case, also this is the case for Annus solis continetur, which so far, considering all the known witnesses, survived 2 times with notation directly related to the text. This is one example of it. A manuscript today in Angers, where we have the notation directly relating to the text, a 10th or maybe 11th century Breton manuscript. Breton is seen here as a not as a geographical area of today's, well, northwestern France. It's not clear where directly we have to locate this very manuscript. And I apologize for the bad quality of this image, but I'm in touch with the library in Berlin in order to get a better image. A 11th century manuscript from Metz, where we also have notation on this very text. You can see here a bit of it, you can see here. And of course this offers the opportunity to compare these texts with each other, these witnesses, and compare the notation. And I am not a musicologist, but double checking with my colleagues, it seems, and we have to wait for the better image or go to Berlin and see the original of the second version of the Metz version, but it seems like in this case the melody is not the same, so the chant is not the same. There seems to be different versions of singing Annus solis continetur. It is also contained in a codex which is either produced in Western Switzerland or Southern France from the 11th century, where we have a annotation on the very folio where also the text of Annus Solis Continuetur is contained. It seems like this notation is not necessarily relating to the text itself, but maybe someone had a reason to put it exactly there. So research on this notational event is still going on. It's still kind of a riddle for me. And as a little addition, this codex also contains Anni Domini Nutantur. These are all the manuscripts that are known to the Corpus Rhythmorum Musicum. In this case, I didn't find any further witness so far. And you see that I already highlighted different colors with the arrows. Green are manuscripts that I already mentioned before and that also contain Anni Domini Nutantur, which is also occasionally the case in other cases here. Well, and then I used the same colors as at the previous map, and I could just go on and show you the map. So far, Annus Solis Continuetur is not known to be in a manuscript that is of the same book type as Leon 8 or Angelica 123. Therefore, no purple arrow. But we have it twice with notation, which is already quite valuable. And we have at least 4 witnesses where it appears in a codex with occasionally musical notation. And here we have one of the methodological problems, because this very manuscript, Vatican Reginensis Latinus 1723, is the one where Anni Domini Nutantur appears with notation. So there are problems with my categorization, I'm aware of that. But why do I permanently say there are codices with notation? Because I found over 30 cases of musical notation, let's call it near computus. And as I said, many of them are not known to the databases, and checking the most important literature on these codices, they don't appear. My theory is that musicologists, and this is no offense, by far not, don't show the most interest into computistic codices, and those people who are working on computus don't really care about musicology. So I want to be a bridge builder here. And I just show you a couple of examples of these over 30 witnesses that I realized. This one here is today in Leiden, in the collection of Scaliger, number 40, shelf mark 49. It's a 10th, 11th century codex from Fulda, and it contains, other than its musical notation, a martyrologium, calendars, works of Dionysius Exiguus, who is very important for the medieval science of computus. It contains historiographical works, such as the Annales Sancti Bonifatii, works of, and also the Liber Pontificalis. We have Easter tables and works of Marianus Scotus. Another example here, Barberini Latinus 477, 11th century, perhaps produced in Cluny, and other content besides the notation of the chant is beats de temporibus, especially the chapter Cursu et ordo temporibus, and also his work on Easter. And of course, Easter is very important for the computists. And just another example out of many, today in the collection of Scaliger in Leiden, under the shelf mark 38, a 11th century manuscript from Western France, which contains three times musical notation, and I offered here 2 examples. And other works in this very codex are Annus Solis Continuetur, which I mentioned before, Pseudo-Alcuin, a text on the astrolabe, and texts on astronomy. So obviously, based on these 2 examples, Anni Domini Nutantur and Annus Solis Continuetur, there are 3 obvious relations between computus and musical notation. First of all, time reckoning is important for the date of high feasts, which is important for the liturgy, for specific holidays, which is important for the chant. The other obvious relation is that there are mnemonic strategies in order to better remember knowledge. The medieval science of computers is a kind of knowledge, and it's important that the people dealing with it know it. So you need a strategy to remember this. Words that rhyme are easily memorable. It also helps recalling knowledge if the rhyme has also a rhythm, and if it furthermore has a melody, it's the best case. Therefore, it's also a way of learning that these kind of texts have been sung. And furthermore, if we consider the idea of the septem artis liberalis in the Middle Ages, music is related to arithmetics, together with which it belongs to the overall field of physics, which also includes astronomy. And this is important. Astronomy deals with not just with navigation for ships, it also deals with the movement of celestial bodies. And this is important for the measurement of time. And then we are again in the field of computers. And this is just some final remarks. There is 4 times, and I couldn't show the 4th image here because we are not allowed to. There's at least 4 witnesses where there is notation of on Ausonius Eclogiarum, which is a poem on the zodiac signs and the stars. So also this astronomical knowledge has been sung, and it is, as I said during the previous slide, important for the medieval science of computers. By the way, here, so far as it seems, the melody seems to be the same in these witnesses here. And I want to sum up what's the potential of this approach. First of all, it is interdisciplinary. We have the field of computers, we have the field of astronomy, we have the field of historical writing, since also these witnesses appear in codices that contains texts such as the Liber Pontificalis or annals and so on. By the way, annals very often are written close to Easter tables. And we have musical notation and liturgy in all of this subject. The systematic investigation of computistic codices leads to finding new musical notation. And also the question is, what are we doing with these rather fragmentary musical notation that is so far unknown or barely investigated? And these up to over 30 witnesses of that kind have been discovered and are, let's say, for me, the reason to go further into this subject, although not being completely certain about what my strategy will be. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Patrick, for such a rich paper and fascinating to see so many sources that many of us, I'm sure, haven't seen before. May I open the floor for questions? Yeah, Giulio? Ah, yeah. Thank you.
Funziona? Oh, okay. Thank you. Wanted to point out that on the slide showing Bede and De Pascali, the chant that's attached, yeah, this one, seems to be a Easter Alleluia antiphon, so that makes perfect sense following up on Bede. And you can see it from the series of short Alleluia invocations. Those are typically found in Easter time Alleluias. Antiphons, sorry. So it's interesting to see how it's tied together, and that's definitely a confirmation of what you were saying.
Yeah. Thank you.
And the fact that musical notation appears on hymns is also somewhat of a confirmation that hymns would have been quite naturally sung even if they didn't have musical notation, I think so. Even the fact that you see different melodic versions for the same hymn, that just says of possibilities of singing fixed rhythms meters with different melodies.
Okay.
So I didn't really have a question, but I've been really struck by how all things nicely wrap up together that you showed. So thank you.
Thank you too. Thanks. Just as a further comment on this manuscript that you mentioned here, it's always this very line, which appears, I think, 5 times in this codex, and it's the notation always is on this evia, evia, and so on, and it's like on occasional folios, and it's only these words where there is notation repeatedly.
Thank you for this general overview. Very interesting. Do you have a chance to compare the melody if it is an original melody, a formulaic, it's or some like a recurrent melody? Because clearly it's psychologically it's easier to remember something which is sung, but if you have to learn a new melody for every text, this is not very economic.
That's a very good point. I haven't thought about this. And also the answer is, for now, no, I don't have a comparison for this, but at least for the case of Anni Domini Notantur, Sam Barrett transcribed it into modern notation, and we have an idea of the melody that is sung on this very hymnus. And it is different from Annus Solis Continentur, so yeah. But that's an important point. Thank you very much.
There is another place in the liturgy where numbers are sung, which is the in the Epiphany, the moment in which the Paschal feasts are announced. So maybe there could be a relationship or not.
To get you right, you mean that there was a known melody and the hymns were written according to this known melody in order to have something that is familiar and connect the text, so the knowledge, to this familiar melody. Okay. Yeah, of course, yeah.
So the image of bead on the screen, of course, I thought about None Aprilis, which that made me think, well, that's about, 13 new sources. What complete, I mean, there's lots of other compositional verse that we do know about. So what size is this repertory in?
It's very diverse. So sometimes it even seems sometimes to be probationes. Sometimes it is like really something completely unrelated, written on empty space.
Compositional verse that is notated. What size is that? I mean, you're adding your 32 material that was already known. So just what does it look like?
How many total? You said new sources. There must have been a few new sources. That doesn't make sense.
I mean, there's been a good amount of publication.
Okay. I don't know if there's a number, because so the way I was getting to these new witnesses was, as soon as I find something, I look up if there is anything on it, and if there's nothing written about it, I tick it as potentially new. And I'm not sure if there is already a number of computistic musicological relation that is already known. So
well, there's a bibliography. Yeah. There is a bibliography that I can help you with. I mean, because there are a good number, and it's a small number of people that worked on these. But just to get a sense, if you have a kind of ground theory about the relationship between computers and singing and canto was unique than the other ones.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Jeremy.
Thank you very much for your paper. A more general question. You've talked about computers and knowledge, but how far historically do you think the management of knowledge changes from the 9th century up to the 12th century? And how is that linked to the sites or to the institutions that may have wanted to produce this knowledge and the relationship to notation?
So we have the Easter tables by beat, and they have one problem: they end in 1063. So the closer the year of 1063 gets, the bigger is the interest into computistic knowledge. And therefore, from the early 11th century onwards, there's a strong increase of the production of computistic collections, which is visible, I would even say, in all the Latin world. I focused more or less on southern French and northeastern Iberian witnesses. But the closer the end of the Easter table gets, the more they want to know, okay, when actually is Easter and how can we figure it out? So let's gather everything we can get about this, and therefore there's a strong increase in the production of these kind of texts from the 11th century onwards.
And could there be any connection with the writing of music in this process?
I guess there could, but I cannot directly point with my finger on it, where exactly it is. But I would not be too surprised if. Yeah.
If I may, thank you very much, Patrick. The reason, Patrick has been focusing a lot over the past year and a half on matters, of course, of philology and transmission of text and so on. And I think that one of the reasons why perhaps the number, he hasn't got a ready number to assign to the corpus, is that he, and in fact I would encourage Patrick if you could expand a little bit on the first section of your paper, which is the part of the work to which you devoted most of your past year, which is that of finding evidence of spreading of music writing in a particular region, which is that roughly going from the Iberian Peninsula towards South France, via South France into the north of Italy, finding evidence for that transmission, evidence which is not notational, but it's, let's call it extra notational or circumstantial evidence, such as, for example, transmission of liturgical text and spreading of particular texts, and in your case, computus. In other words, to sum up, I think if you could say something more about exactly that, the fact that you've discovered that there are specific texts that are transmitted as part of liturgical books with music in a particular region, I think it probably become clearer why this kind of interest in computus, which is not only just computus and musical notation, but it's computus, musical notation, and liturgy as part of a whole phenomenon of textual transmission in a particular area.
The work I have done previously in the past year of SCRIBEMUS was mainly focused on the first of these poems, and the fact that this poem has been altered permanently in the course of its dissemination. So the poem is not has not always the same amount of stanzas, not always the same order of stanzas. This all changes. And based on that, and also based on other philological comparisons, you can kind of put it into different families of dissemination. And this textual comparison showed that there was a lot of, let's call it parts of the Italian family, also several Italian texts that have been merged. So there actually, one can say the shape, the textual shape of Anni Domini Nutantur as it appears in the 11th century is a mixture of two much earlier texts, because there was a, let's say, early form of Anni Domini Nutantur in the 9th century that was transmitted along with another, let's say, also educational, but more educational text, which appears as commentary on the subjects that appear in Anni Domini Nutantur. And it always begins with si vis scire, and then if you want to know when bisextus is, if you want to know when equinox is, and so on. And it always begins with the phrase si vis scire. And younger witnesses of Anni Domini Nutantur contain parts of these si vis scire texts. So one merged this, and also this si vis scire text has its origins in Italy, at least in this form as it also appears in Anni Domini Nutantur. So in the 11th century we then have a form of the text that is A, emerging, and B, also added with further notation, and appearing in both in liturgical codices and in codices dealing directly with the Easter date, for instance, as a matter of reckoning. And this knowledge not just went beyond the Western Alps into the southern French regions. There was also an exchange that I would even use the strong word proof, that in between here, this specific form of Anni Domini Nutantur has been exchanged also across the Pyrenees. And then even later versions from the editions from the 12th century, actually in the margins of the 11th century manuscripts, showed that in the 11th century somebody was aware, okay, this is Anni Domini Nutantur, but there's a stanza missing, so I'm going to add these stanzas in my template in the margins. And we find 12th century marginal notes in 11th century versions of Anni Domini Nutantur, and comparing these with other witnesses shows, okay, whoever added these margins was aware of a different version of Anni Domini Nutantur, belonging to the rather French family of the text. And based on this, I could actually trace back all these entanglements and all these all this exchange. And since this is strongly related to especially Angelica 123, because the most textual compliance in the version that we have in the early 11th century in Avignon, philologically speaking, the most textual compliance we have with Angelica 123. So I'm not saying that Angelica 123 and Madrid National Library 9605 are directly related to each other, but the textual versions in these codices, they descend from the same family. Sorry? And in turn, Ripoll belongs to that very family as well. So since the Avignon version has the most textual compliance with Angelica 103, also the Ripoll version has the most textual compliance with 123, because they have barely no difference in there. So I made a transcription, I made an apparatus criticus, and there is barely differences between these two versions from Avignon and Ripoll.
Thank you. Giovanni, may we have one final question? Or, yeah, please. And then
I'll go exactly to the why of your sky blue relationship, because you have to connect. Why is Leon so far away? It is not so far away geographically. it's immediately connected to Ripoll Montserrat, and so we have this story, and it's now more and more discovered because the Catalans, so sorry to say that, introduce not only liturgy but other texts in Oviedo, Leon, in the early 11th century. It's very easy to explain. We have more witnesses to show that. I showed it with the Sibylline, Tibodine Sibylline, that it works in this way. And the core center of the connection to Italy is exactly this network. And therefore you can explain also Carcassonne or La Grasse, because exactly at the same time the counts of Barcelona, what do? They buy their old county where they come from. And La Grassa is the abbey where they make donations, endowments and so on, very heavily, exactly at that time. And therefore we have this connection. The triangle situation, and to the north, this is the old Ripoll, Fleury, Loire Valley connection. You can easily explain it from the philological standpoint, from the biographical standpoint, and this is the new thing we have to do. We can do with the charters and the personal networks. Catalonia is full of thousands of charters, not only up to that millennium, but after. And I'm becoming aware what we can do with this material, because we see really the families, how they work, how they had contacts to Italy. Did you know that the 5 counts of Barcelona were Italians? Bonucci, Bonuncio, small, Bonbonus, no? I discovered it only reading charters, but nobody ever published on that so far. That means we have to go to this material as well and bring forward new arguments. But this is absolutely the future. We can do that, perhaps in Italy as well. I do not know. Okay, more in the afternoon.
We have just received a comment in our YouTube chat, so Barbara Guglo has just written, verses are also reordered in the processes of transmission. Just a comment for you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot.
Huglo, I think that was. Okay, thank you so much, Patrick, for such a great stuff of the conference. And now it's a great pleasure to introduce David Gans, and I'm going to trot out the old cliche, which in this case really is true, that he needs no introduction. For a conference on writing, I don't think we could be lucky to have a greater expert in the room, and so I'm delighted to welcome him and to say merely that he is on the Comité International de Paléographie Latine, and I'm sure we all know his marvellous work on Courbet, on Notker, on many other things. He tells me that at the moment he's currently working on insular manuscripts, and today we're going to hear his considerations on the scriptorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me? Yeah. I must apologize to all of you here, firstly, for my profound, despite matrimonial complications, ignorance of anything musicological, and secondly, for giving you a paper in which I think Italy is not mentioned at all. Mea culpa. When in around 1678, Charles Dufresne wanted to define a scriptorium, he quoted Alcuin's poem written as a titulus for a scriptorium, and he quoted the oratio in scriptorio found in the sacramentary of Gellon around 790. On the plan of an ideal monastery preserved at the Abbey of St. Gall, we've got this square building at the end of the Abbey church, showing seats for writers below and the library above, which must have made the writing room rather dark. And here you see a 20th century reconstruction with the monks at their desks and the central table, which is in the plan. Gelasian and Gregorian sacramentaries contain blessings for the scriptorium and verses for scriptoria composed by Isidore of Seville, by Alcuin, by Lupus of Ferrières. You see in the top left the barely legible poem with the transcription made by Michael Allen of Chicago of the verses for a room built by Lupus, suitable for copyists, because there was no room in his abbey before then. So we've got a group of scribes working together in a designated working space. As Malcolm Parks has noted, in English, scriptorium can mean both the group of scribes engaged in the organized copying of texts and the place where that copying occurred. In England, that place seems to have been more often a carrel, an individual study, rather than a specific room for a group. Nicholas, the secretary of St. Bernard of Clairvaux between 1145 and 1151, described his situation where he had what he called a scriptoriolum, a little scriptorium, opening beside the cell of the novices and situated between the cloister of the monks and the infirmary, and which was full of books for reading and for writing. And in the custom of Hirsau, we learn about other scribes who wrote in chapels sitting together. I show you the famous illustration of the scriptorium at Tavara with two named scribes. You can see their names written above their heads, Emeterius and Senior, from the copy of Beatus on the Apocalypse, completed in 970. And this depicts a situation rather similar to that described by Herriman, abbot of St. Martin in Tournai in 1147, when the abbey was founded under the first abbot Odo around 1100. If you'd gone into the cloister, you would generally have seen a dozen young monks sitting on chairs, writing at tables diligently, artistically, and in silence. And you can see a Tournai manuscript perhaps slightly later than those which were produced under Odo. According to Hermann, everybody wanted books written at Tournai to serve as their exemplars. Grants were made to fund work in the scriptorium. At Winchester, the revenues for a church near Swindon were granted in 1107 for making books, and the grant was confirmed on several occasions. We've got a similar grant at Abingdon to buy parchment for the books of the church. At Canterbury, 1126, 3 marks for making books. Since Leopold de Lisle's work on Tours in 1886, paleographers have identified manuscripts as the products of such collective scribal activity. De Lisle pointed to the use of half-uncial in the Bibles from Tours and Gospel books from Tours, and he was able to compile a list of 25 manuscripts with these features. Ludwig Trauber described the use of half-uncial as the Fabrikmarker, the factory mark of scribes at Tours, and it was Trauber who spotted that the names in the Vatican Livy, you'll see at the very bottom of the page, names of scribes. Here, a collection of them, and you'll see written, presumably written by the scribes. These aren't all the works of the same hand of somebody parceling out quires. And Trauber and others found that the same names are found in the lists of the monks of Tours in the confraternity books of St. Gall and Pfaffers. Research on scriptoria was a feature of articles in Wallace Martin Lindsay's journal Paleographia Latina in the 1920s, Paul Liebert on Corbie, Sigmund Tafel on Lyon, Lindsay on the script of Laon and on Lorsch, Lindsay and Lehmann on Mainz, Loeffler on Constance and St. Gallen. And at the same time, E.A. Lowe worked on Lyon. Bruckner began his great work on the scriptoria of Switzerland. The model for any such study of scriptorium was established by Bernhard Bischoff, both in his 1933 Munich dissertation on St. Emmeram am Regensburg and in his 1940 volume on the southeastern German writing schools. These studies may be supplemented by important investigations of individual scribes who played a significant role in the development of a scriptorium, such as Adhemar of Chabannes, who died in 1034, Otto of St. Emmeram, who died in 1072, Eadmer of Canterbury, who died in 1126. And, of course, in 1938, the priest Émile Laine, professor and later rector of the Catholic University of Lille, published the fourth volume of his history of ecclesiastical property in France, entitled Les livres, scriptoria et bibliothèques du commencement du 8e à la fin du 11e siècle, with enormous documentation, almost always taken from secondary literature. We've seen a Tour labeling of the sections to be copied. We find that in the shell copy of Augustine on the Psalms, now in Cologne, with a separate manuscript in Berlin, and in Reims manuscripts of Hilary on the Trinity, where you'll see at the bottom the end of the section copied by Hranegill, and Hranegill also copies sections in a manuscript now in Cambridge, a manuscript of Rabanus Maurus, which is the work of 11 different scribes. Certain texts are too long to be easily copied by a single scribe. Augustine and Cassiodorus on the Psalms, Gregory's Moralia, Isidore's Etymologiae are good examples. You see here a copy of the Moralia from Saint Martial with at the end a colophon saying that Adhemar the abbot ordered it, Arleus directed, and the scribe was Peter. And in a manuscript of Isidore's Etymologiae, now in London, we've got the names of 8 female scribes, starting with Gertrude, Sibylla, Djervik, and this manuscript, as you see, is dated to 1134. Hartmut Hoffmann has written that if, north of the Alps at least, until the end of the 11th century, a manuscript is written by a large number of hands, we can conclude that it was made in a clerical scriptorium. A manuscript of Eusebius Rufinus's Ecclesiastical History, now in Angers, is the work of 26 scribes who wrote the 194 folia, with 20 of them giving their names at the end of their quires. So how is this process organized? The armarius at Fleury was responsible for everything relating to writing, for the supply of parchment, threads, and deerskins to bind manuscripts, and also for the correction of books. We've got 2 entries which give us some understanding of the organization of a monastic scriptorium. A Tours manuscript from the 9th century has a calculation of the correct dimensions of a 2-column layout, and in a remarkable entry in a manuscript which belonged to Fulda but was written in Weingarten, we've got a list of 15 quires of most noble parchment, 20 quires of good parchment. If you want to copy the Acts, the Apocalypse, and the Catholic epistles, you need 12 quires and 41 folia. The Abbey owned 47 quires of large format, modulo maiore, 8 quires de minore modulo, and 4 folia, in order to write the rule or a martyrology, and 24 quires of small format in order to write an antiphona. And then at the very bottom, after the cross, you've got a verse, disce puer pulcras per scribere litteras, learn, boy, how to write beautiful letters. In the Consuetudines of Fructuaria, we learn that the cantor made psalters and hymnals from the scraps cut from large sheets and made the youths write on them, and afterwards, with the prior's permission, he was able to sell these psalters and hymnals. A manuscript now in Arras of the canons made by Regino of Prüm has scribal signatures. You see at the bottom Richeberto, and at the top Alberic, and further on 2 more scribes. 9 scribes in all are named, and we get Albertus scripsit, Albertus finem fecit, Albertus reincipit, and Albertus is found in 2 more Arras manuscripts. But there are also cases where scribes at the same centre lack a shared set of conventions about the treatment of the shape of letters. As Tessa Weber has shown at Salisbury, and I quote her, the manuscripts were not copied in a recognizable house style, that is, a distinctive style of script exhibiting a common treatment of letter forms. At Cluny, which Peter already mentioned, Madame Garon has written, aucun profil d'un éventuel style tunisien n'a été exquisé. There was no creation of a house style, and you see samples of Cluny manuscripts of the late 10th century, and you see in the same manuscript the great diversity of scribal hands. All in the same manuscript. So while most religious houses had scribes who collaborated to copy manuscripts for them, there was not necessarily a uniform attitude to script and to the degree of uniformity with which the scripts should attain and maintain. We need investigations of the ways in which shared sets of such conventions change within a scriptorium we can identify. Searching for the distinctive details of letter forms shared by scribes may risk the application of an over-rigid positivism to the study of manuscripts. At different times, in different circumstances, and especially when copying books with different functions, different attitudes prevailed regarding the levels of consistency required in the style of script, the hierarchy of scripts to be used, and the proper punctuation of a text. Terminology is crucial here. I'm not clear that we have an English vocabulary for the notions of what is stilizzata and tipizzata, or French, German, or Italian terms to correspond to what Malcolm Parks called equilibrium. And we need, in any language, an investigation of the process of canonization of the script. Beyond terminology, I want to explore areas of ambiguity. Hartmut Hoffmann noted that Bernard Bischoff was able to localize only 1/3 of the 9th century manuscripts in Bamberg and in Cologne. Why is this so difficult? Ambiguity may be geographic, the status of an individual scriptorium within a Schriftprovinz, local and regional styles of script, the consequence of the arrival of an abbot or bishop trained to write in a different script. It may be political, desire to be identified with Rome, to adopt Caroline script, to maintain independence from Caroline script, and it may be cultural, depending on the different uses to which a book might be put: liturgical, devotional, reference, private reading, collective study. When we identify the products of a scriptorium, just what are we comparing? Distinctions founded on layout, letter forms, ligatures, abbreviations, signes de renvoi, are no longer possible after the 9th century, Bischoff reminds us. In addition, there's the problem of books copied so carelessly that they cannot be attributed to a particular scriptorium, and regions where script becomes so similar that attribution to a particular scriptorium is not possible. The persistence of an older tradition, either through the conservatism of a particular local practice or the age of the scribe, and also early instances of practices that anticipate their use within a subsequently more diffused tradition, and the existence of a local tradition does not preclude the coexistence of scribes who hadn't been trained in it, as we seem to find at Cluny. In addition to the problems raised by the age of the scribe, there is the problem of polygraphism, a term which I owe to Antonio Chiarelli, the capacity of a writer to use different graphic registers. Polygraphism can be defined either as vertical or horizontal. Vertical, the acquisition of scriptorial competence in two distinct graphic modules, such as Beneventan and Caroline, Gothic textualis and Chancery script, humanistic cursive and Macantesca. The writer, having learnt to write first according to one of these models, the perfection which he can then learn to render the second evidently depends on his gifts, her gifts as a calligrapher. In the case of hands little inclined to study and practice, what results will be a contamination, to a greater or lesser extent, of the graphic system acquired later, the second script. Horizontal polygraphism means an apprenticeship trained on two versions of the same model, as at Tours, or when a scribe writes both a documentary and a book script. Let's look at a cathedral. Cathedrals are always more complicated in terms of their acquisition of books, it seems to me. Freising, beautifully studied by Bischoff's student Natalia Daniel. Bishop Abraham, at the end of the 10th century, obtained books from Italy and Metz, as well as organizing copying at Freising. He had an Italian copy of Liutprand's Antapadosis, bound with a Freising copy of the Historia Ratonis. Natalia Daniel identified 7 manuscripts made in northern Italy, but we've also got these manuscripts where a colophon at the start tells us which scribes write. Here you've got a colophon for a manuscript copied for Freising at Metz by 3 scribes, one of whom writes a clearly French hand. Here you've got the same scribe, Wilhelm, working with manuscripts from Metz for a text of Jerome. And here you've got a manuscript copied for Abraham in Freising at the request of the abbot of Toul. So a wide range of different manuscripts, some of which are copied in the same center. Scriptorium is much less of a group distinct from the outside world than one would hope. If we move to the Benedictine Abbey of St. Van Verdun between 1004 and 1046, we've got another set of colophons in which scribes are named, Rotardus, Alberic, and you see the shared but really rather clumsy script. At Mont Saint-Michel, which has now been beautifully studied in the Avranches Littoral website, we've got 74 manuscripts copied between around 980 and 1100 in 3 groups, the work of between 12 and 24 scribes, and it's been estimated that perhaps a third of the monks of Mont Saint-Michel worked in the scriptorium. The earliest named scribe is Hervados, whom you'll see at the bottom right in a copy of Gregory of Tours, now divided between Leiden and Paris. And Hervados also copied the first 16 books of Gregorius Moralia, part of Augustine on the Psalms, Cassian's Collations, Jaimo on the Pauline Epistles, and was one of the scribes of a copy of Augustine's City of God. In the next generation, Giraldus wrote several books for Mont Saint-Michel, including Augustine on the Psalms, and Augustine contra Faustum, and he names himself both on the left, at the bottom in these very large letters, Giraldus, and on the right. And this style continues into the 11th century. Here you see Frotmundus in two Mont Saint-Michel manuscripts of around 1040, 1055. And another Mont Saint-Michel scribe, Mauritius, went from Mont Saint-Michel to St. Augustine's Canterbury, where he was active between around 1070 and 1090. In the last quarter of the 11th century, at the Abbey of St. Victrudis in Marchienne, we've got a scribe, Amandus, whom you see down here, and again in another manuscript. I'm sorry, these are only black and white photographs from the ERC website. And at Cambrai, in the 1060s, we've got 13 manuscripts, 5 of which are signed by the scribe who calls himself Fulbertus Peccator. This is from the Moralia. He also wrote a legendary, 2 copies of John Cassian, and Smaragdus is Diadema Monachorum. And it's been calculated that Fulbertus copied more than 1,100 folios. In other manuscripts, he writes the opening section, the Praescriptio. But the point about Fulbertus, according to the study by Madame Schneiders, is that he lacks any stylistic homogeneity, his ruling is irregular, he misjudges the space required for copying a text, he fails to coordinate a consistent layout. He wasn't a particularly skilled scribe, but nevertheless he did a great deal. And let's look at 2 more prolific scribes. Otlo of St. Emmeram, born in 1010 and died in 1070, is perhaps the scribe who tells us most about himself in his autobiographical writings. He was sent as a scribe firstly to Herzfeld, then to Würzburg, scribendi causa. He copied many books at Tegensee, and that seems to be where he learnt his particular style of writing. In addition to his own works, he wrote, he tells us, almost every day. And he tells us that he copied 19 missals, 10 for the abbots and monks in our own monastery, 4 for the brethren at Fulda, 5 for those in other places. He copied 3 books of the Gospels and 2 of epistles and Gospels, which are called lectionaries, besides which I wrote 4 service books for Matins. I sent 7 books to Fulda, 2 to Herzfeld, 1 to Aumerbach, 4 to Brother William, 4 to brothers in Bohemia, 3 to Obermünster, and 2 to Tegensee. And Bernard Bischoff was able to list 13 surviving books copied by Otlo 5 of which contain his own works. And here you see the end of Otlo's copy of John Cassion's Circolazione is now in Munich, with a little bit of an added neumed mini-text for the musicologists among you. Last, but by no means least, the recluse Dietmut, who was active at the nunnery of Wesserbrunn around 1100, and we have this remarkable list of the 45 manuscripts she copied. 5 missals, a missal with a gradual and a sequentiary, a book with a gradual and a sequentiary, a missal with epistles and gospel readings and a gradual and a sequentiary, totaling 5 missals, 2 officiales, 1 gospel book, 2 gospel lectionaries, 1 epistolary, a complete Bible in 5 volumes, in 2 volumes, another Bible in 3 volumes, a copy of Gregory's Moralia in 6 volumes, 3 volumes of homilies, a 3-volume copy of Augustine on the Psalms, 2-volume copy of Augustine on John, and a 2-volume copy of Cassiodorus' Historia Tripartita. Surely a magnificent achievement. In addition to scribes who were members of religious communities, we can find professional scribes, and I show you the famous miniature in the Pericopenbuch of Henry III, now in Bremen, with a monk copying and a bearded layman also copying in the same centre. At Abingdon, near Oxford, around 1100, we know of 6 professional scribes, 3 at St. Albans. In 12th century Cirencester, manuscripts were copied by 7 Augustinian canons and a lay scribe, Radulphus Scriptor, who's named in 3 of the books. The statutes of Saint Victor in Paris mention scribes writing for payment, who are to be supplied and paid by the armarius. And Saint Victor from 1115 seems to have used the professional scribes rather than the canons of Saint Victor. Françoise Gaspari identified 42 St. Victor manuscripts copied before around 1150, and another 49 copied between 1150 and around 1175. And most of the manuscripts are manuscripts of St. Victor authors. If you have a house author, whether you're at Saint Victor or whether you're dealing with Bede at Jarrow, you have a problem. You need to copy his works. But Mademoiselle Gaspari wrote about these Saint Victor manuscripts. They are manuscrits de travail sans recherche calligraphique, at least 22 of the 91 that she's discussed. So, to end, I leave you with the observation of my friend and teacher, Francis Newton. In every great and productive scriptorium, there will be a diversity of output. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this incredibly rich paper and for really challenging us to think about what a scriptorium is and all the problems that we have created by using that term, as well as showing us what it can be. I'd like to open the floor for questions. Yeah, perhaps Marcus first.
Thank you, and thank you for such an interesting paper. It stimulated quite a nostalgic throwback to my PhD thesis when I worked on a manuscript held in the British Library, one of the old Hispanic liturgical manuscripts. In that manuscript, we have two different scribes working in slightly different styles of Visigothic minuscule. The second hand went back and corrected quite a lot of the first scribe's works. The first scribe, by the end of his stint, clearly is responding to those corrections and is actually adapting his style to begin to sort of mirror that of the second hand. It's more sort of a hybrid between the beginning of his script and the second hand script, or style rather. I wondered how often you come across that sort of active process of correction and adaptation in your evidence where you have scribes working in these different styles.
In many customs, the armarius is charged with correcting the text, and a good scriptorium will have somebody who corrects. I'd expect correction rather than not. But obviously, if you're copying an enormous text like the Moralia, it's an effort, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
May I follow on? So, not just correction necessarily, I mean, but actually a scribe responding to and adapting in response to.
I mean, in his great Jarrow lecture about the scriptorium of Weymouth Jarrow, Malcolm Parkes points out that the reason why we can recognize manuscripts copied at Weymouth Jarrow much more readily than from any other Anglo-Saxon centre of the time is, he thinks, because of the discipline, the monastic discipline, which is reflected in the scribal discipline. And I mean, if we've got that sort of discipline, if we've got a master of a scriptorium who corrects, who imposes his own style of writing, and very often we find at the start of a manuscript a section written by the best scribe, which not only shows what he thinks the letters ought to look like, but also shows the spacing and spacing. I mean, Malcolm Parkes has a wonderful sentence talking about the internal dimensions of letters. It's these kinds of things which perhaps one realizes as a calligrapher rather than as a paleographer that are important.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, David. Does it work? Yeah, okay. For your stimulating paper and always the richness of all your knowledge. I came across a phenomenon, we just discussed it last year in September in Leuven. We had a conference on the role of the Carolingian rule for canons, so the Aachen rule, and discussed much about dissemination now, because this is one of these normative texts which the emperor wanted to be disseminated immediately. And so we know that we have doubts that it really happened. The emperor tried to implement a system of control, if it is really disseminated, and so on. And when discussing the manuscripts, we came across the phenomenon that this tremendous big copy they had to do, there are many early copies where we have the tricky situation of discussing, is it now a product of such an established scriptorium, or at least a place where professional writing in the sense of the 9th century really happened? Or do we have the communities established for very different people with different writing styles? Because we saw, for example, the phenomenon of missing coordination of the choirs and all these things which happened in the manuscript. And then I said, okay, I have it the same thing there with the, let's say, places where the emerging religious practice and also the use, daily, everyday use of the manuscripts is visible. And coming together these things like Visigothic, Caroline, minuscule in transition, coming together with already professionally written Caroline minuscule, and so on. And I guess that is perhaps that we look into the very early stage of something which could become something like a scriptorium. And therefore we have a phenomenon, such a grayish zone between what we can really see from the big scriptoria, which are disseminating also, and we see it more and more, the phenomenon in the 9th century, and so on and so on. We came across in my project with Walter of the dissemination of the canon the canon law collections from Lyon. It's obviously the same phenomenon, but these are professionally written manuscripts. But the other phenomenon, we have still problems to implement them into the panorama of how to qualify a scriptorium, or what in the widest sense a scriptorium could be. Do you have any idea how we can solve this problem from your experience?
By continuing to look, and by looking, as you've done so well, at texts, when you were comparing the same text in different manuscripts, especially in different manuscripts at the same day, you're really learning something about what scribes are doing. I mean, two heads are better than one, two copies are better than one.
Well, I mean, can I just say how privileged we've been for such a wonderful and so erudite overview on the concept of the scriptorium. And I think, you know, at a certain point I even stopped taking notes because I just wanted to enjoy such a great paper. Thank you very much, David. I have, in comparison to your, as I said, wonderful paper, perhaps a very small question, but something we asked ourselves in the past months, which is a question of grades of manuscripts and how they relate to a scriptorium. We tend to assume, but do correct me if I'm wrong, that it's mainly, predominantly, high-grade manuscripts being produced in a scriptorium, or let's say medium to high grades. And the question is, is there anything that could make us believe that that also lower grade manuscripts are produced in a scriptorium, or should we perhaps think instead of a kind of a more private setting, such as, for example, the cell of a monk, and a more private, as I said, restricted context for the copying of more everyday use lower grade manuscripts?
The most helpful thing I've found on this is Natalia Daniel on Freising, where she talks about a Stilhohe, the grade, and with school texts as perhaps the lowest grade, and you know, great liturgical books. Right at the top. But I mean, if we have reason to assign books of all these grades to the same center, then I think we can usefully start comparing and even in sort of middle grade books, if you're dealing with texts which require glosses, you can get sometimes a different grade of script in the gloss, but it's clearly being produced in the same place. I think there is an awareness, and that's why I force you to listen to my incoherent reflections on polygraphism.
Yes.
Most good scribes do not write only one script, even if it's just the capital that they use for chapter headings.
It comes to mind, if I can just follow up just very briefly, if there's no other question. We still got some time. Can I just... it just comes to mind El Gildeo, of course, in this idea of a scribe not using the same grade or the same type of script for the main text, and then the Sale Modulamina. I think this was one of the reasons why many were skeptic about the being the same hand, but actually it's indeed a demonstration of what David has just remarked on. The reason why I'm asking about grades is because it's within the context of mini texts, of course, and reflections related to that. Where do they happen? Do they happen in the scriptorium during the process of copying? Unlikely, but possible. Do they happen in a more private setting? More likely, perhaps, a private consultation, private study. The content of these mini texts sometimes is pedagogic in nature, and therefore the question is, was the manuscript at a certain point in a context where teaching was performed or took place? So it's all a set of reflections that we as a group shall indeed explore in due course, and I just thank you very much for your excellent paper.
The trouble with paleographers is that sometimes they don't actually read the text.
Did you just say the trouble is that they don't read the text? Well, can I say it's so true? The paper just made me think that one of the lists of books that you showed, if I had seen that, I would have thought, well, this is just, I don't know, a gospel or a sermon or something like that. But then it's when you read the actual text that you've engaged with it.
I mean, I think what's so evocative about what you showed is we really get the sense of the scribes as people.
Absolutely.
And so I was thinking about that. I mean, I'm obviously drawn to the examples of female scribes, but you only had two. Presumably that's okay. I mean, but does that reflect the reality? Is that less common? And then what age are your scribes? Presumably they're young, or... And then I thought about your scribe who describes himself as a sinner, but yet he copied a lot. Like, why is that? No good. Why did they?
I think he wants the reader to pray for him.
Okay, to improve his script.
No, to improve his long-term prospects.
But I mean, they let him loose on all this parchment. Why?
They don't have anyone better.
Yeah.
Presumably. Don't know.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued by the idea of house style, and apparently it has a lot to do with what the manuscript looks like. But do you see traces of house styles like this also in orthography, in how abbreviations are used, or how they're marked and not used?
I don't know that if anybody's worked on orthography, whether they were. I mean, it would be interesting, especially for scribes whose mother language is not Romance, if they're copying Latin, to see whether there are shared features of orthography. But I mean, my former colleague Carlotta Dionisotti, who wrote a wonderful book, wrote a wonderful article in the Review Benedictine on Bede's De Orthographia, envisaged that text as being on the desk of the scribe. How do I spell? I don't know if she's right, but it's I mean.
how can I do it? I try to convince them at the moment, but otherwise I cannot publish good records. And this is a big problem. No, because when my key manuscripts, when I follow this concept, I must follow this concept. In this case, shows Romanized Latin. I cannot falsify it in this Latin. So, but Gärtner Jones and others perhaps will at the end understand. Still in discussion. Okay.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating paper.
Don't worry, it's not too much of a problem. It's just logging in, see if I still remember the password.
Oh no, do you want me to have a try?
Yeah, exactly, but don't worry. I can't even...
Right, but this one...
So that's... This is Susan's, by the way. It could stay... what we could do is we could do this.
I have it.
Oh no, she might not want to do... Okay, let's do one thing at a time. 5 words.
Just your USB, I think should be fine.
Do you have a USB-C stick?
Ooh. Yeah, it's an ordinary one.
Okay. I sent them just extra steps for Giovanni, so if there was a...
No, don't worry. I mean, look, Scribemus,
Thank you.
okay, and the password should be, yeah, okay, okay.
Good thing.
You ready?
I think so. Ready as I'll ever be. It's a bit late now.
I can airdrop it to you if you want.
No, because I think it's better if you use this, I think. 9, 6, 1, 5, 1, 8. Okay, schedule just started, but I don't find any live stream on the YouTube link that was provided. I'm on the department website